Hi YouTube, Art here again with another video, but we're not talking about audio today. We're going to talk about something a little bit different. I don't know about y'all, but I am tired of paying hundreds of dollars for premium gaming controllers just to get them, and for them to not feel very premium. I feel like I'm paying a premium just to have some back buttons and back paddles that get stuck and break. The biggest issue is maybe out of the box or even after a couple days of use, these all develop stick drift. And wouldn't it be nice if you could just spend about $200 on a controller that you didn't have to dive into the BIOS to overclock, that maybe didn't have drift after the first couple days of use or out of the box? Maybe it wouldn't get drift ever. Well, I am very excited to share with you that controller today. Meet the FlyDigi Apex 4. This controller chooses to swap out its joystick modules from the usual carbon modules that wear down and rub away over time for these Hall effect joysticks. What is a Hall effect sensor? Well, a Hall effect sensor uses a magnet inside to detect the position and the movement of the stick. This means that these sticks will never wear out until the spring wears out, and they will feel much more precise than your traditional carbon stick. Before we really deep dive into this controller and cover all the things that I love, let's get the things that I think y'all might not like out of the way. First, it's an Xbox layout controller, and I know a lot of people play on PlayStation layout. Me personally, I switched for mouse and keyboard, and I don't really have an affinity to either layout. I can kind of flex between the two. For me, I actually like this layout more after some time. 2, this does not have your traditional mouse click triggers. It does have a function on it that allows you to have very, very short trigger pulls, but it is different than most other controllers. We're going to cover that in great detail later, but first, now that we've kind of covered those two weird things, let's cover the good in the controller, and there is a lot of good here. First, the sticks. Like I covered in the intro, these sticks do not use carbon scraping elements to tell where you are. They use magnets, and they are much more precise. If you want to learn more about that and you want to see why the carbon sensors are bad, I've linked Marius Heyer's channel below. He has a video on Hall effect sensors. He also has a video showing why sticks drift and wear down over time. The point being, this uses magnets. It will not wear down and drift over time. The modules in this controller were developed by FlyDigi, especially for this Apex 4 controller, and they are tensionable. If you remove both sticks, the D-pad and the clear face panel, on the right side, there's a small removable metal tool, and you can use it to twist the small screw mechanism right next to each joystick. This increases or decreases the tension. I've never played with a controller with tension, and this tension mechanism is great. On the left stick, I run none and is loosey-goosey. Initially, I did the same on the right stick, but it was too weird. I'm too used to tension, so I was able to dial it in to the tension level I like, and so far, it hasn't changed from that. Also, the L3, R3 action, or pushing the stick down, is so crisp and clicky on this. It feels like pressing a key, and I love it. It is by far the best L3, R3 action I've ever felt on the controller. I also just want to take a second to sing the praises of these sticks. I have never used a joystick on a controller that felt like aiming with a mouse with that level of precision until I used these sticks. And I'm not just blowing smoke up y'all's butts. I am really, really impressed with these sensors. It feels like the most precise controller I have ever used. Now, a really quick note about the thumbsticks. They don't come with any extra heights. You can order them from AliExpress, which is a whole nother thing we'll talk about here later in the video. But they do fit PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5 control freaks with a little bit of effort. They do kind of chew up the thumbsticks, but you can get them on, and I still use them. They work fantastic. Now let's get right into the triggers. This is the one feature that I think people might find kind of weird. This uses Hall effect triggers much like the PS5 Edge controller. So what does that mean? Each trigger is actually a magnet that tells where you are by how deep you press and what the magnetic signal is. They can also press back against you. So certain games support adaptive feedback so that when you shoot the gun, you feel the recoil. There's a whole section of the app that we'll touch on a little bit later. But what's interesting to me is they have a trigger lock mode. This allows you in the software to set a level where you want the trigger to stop. And this allows me to effectively have mouse click triggers. Now, the only issue with this, when I first started playing with it, I'd get in close range fights and I'd kind of death squeeze my controller because I'm a newer controller player, and you can push through the magnet. And it's a little disorienting the first couple times you do it, but after about 2 days of playing with these triggers, I got used to it, and I no longer push through it. The only time I push through it is when I'm sniping, and it's kind of nice because as I push through the trigger, I can hold down my left stick to hold my breath and then take the shot, and it kind of feels natural because as I squeeze that left side of the controller, it just gives, and there's no mechanical crunch or anything from my death grip. Now, before we get into the software and I show you how the trigger lock system works, let's talk about the back buttons. The back buttons on this are fantastic. I've yet to use a controller with actual buttons that has felt good, but the placement of this is really great. As I'm using the controller, the 2 main buttons are right on my middle fingers, and then if I push up on the body of the controller, I can very easily get to the 2 extra buttons. It's very important for me because I use all 4 paddles. I use jump and slide, plate, and reload. And this is a great time to talk about the fact that the software in this controller, like the Envision, lets you map keybinds. So my top right button, instead of being X to reload, is R on the keyboard. So I tap that, so when I'm in the middle of a gunfight and there's a bunch of loot on the ground, I'm not gonna accidentally loot somebody's stuff. I have a direct reload key that also lets me use tap to interact. So when I loot, I can just tap my key. That's what I loved about the Envision, and I can still do it on this software. And unfortunately for the Envision, this software is way more stable. Not only can you map any of the back paddles to any button on the face or any key on the keyboard, but you can also remap all of the face buttons. The only 2 buttons I found that you cannot remap is this small circle button at the bottom and the home button. As of recording this video and to the extent of my research, the Apex 4 from FlyDigi is also only a PC controller, so sorry console people. Seems like a good time to go ahead and just jump right into the software. The software this controller uses is called FlyDigi Space Station. You can get it from the FlyDigi website. I'll link that down below in the description. It's nothing really exciting. There is one small bug I learned with it though. When you open it, you see that little notification, my camera probably covered it, where it said the controller was connected. Now, if you see in my Alt-Tab windows here, there is a small window here called Toast Window. If you leave this open after you launch the app, Call of Duty will not give you the full screen exclusive option. I found this randomly while testing, so if you do get this controller, all you need to do is Alt-Tab and close that Toast window, and then you will get full screen exclusive back. If you're wondering what Toast is, it's just the little pop-ups that show you whether something is connected or disconnected that overlay everything on Windows like Discord. Turning that off made full screen exclusive work. So this is the home page with the controller connected, and it gives you the rundown. It tells you that I have everything mapped on all of the custom buttons on the back, 0 dead zone, classic curves, some RGB notes, and then the trigger lock mode. So we'll just go across from left to right. The first mode here, or menu item, is the buttons menu. So the first item you have are the expanded menus. It doesn't really do a good job of labeling them on the back, which is a small complaint, but after some trial and error, you'll find them. You see I have A, Y, B, and then like I said, the R key on the keyboard. And the way you remap these is you click it and then you just press the key on your keyboard or press the button on your controller. You can also remap all of the front buttons, the D-pad, the select, the start buttons, the left stick, the right stick. I left these all stock because I want those functions unbothered. The next menu item in the software is the joystick. This was on something different when I started. I put it on classic because I want to just use no effect here on the curve. I'm going to use the in-game curves, and you want to make sure that your dead zone is 0. These are Hall effect sticks, so there is no drift. It is a very reactive controller, so you want to make sure these dead zones are 0. You can match the same on the right stick. You see classic and a 0 dead zone. The next tab is motion sensing. This is for gyro. I go ahead and just leave that off. Also, I forgot, there are profiles here on the side. I've just always chosen the second one, shooting, and based all my settings off that. You can configure each of these differently, the triggers in different configurations for different games that you play, and switch between the profiles. The next menu item is the most important in my opinion. This is the trigger menu. This is where you can set up the trigger lock function. You see I have that enabled here. This is going to bring this controller into first-person shooter mode, in my opinion. This allows you to set a stop, so the larger the number on the damping start position here, the deeper you can press the controller before it stops. The smaller the number, the shorter the travel. I have both of mine set to 17. Seems to be the sweet spot for my posture and my fingers. You can set this to a lower number and it'll be a shorter travel. Just note that if you do reach the end of it, you are able to push through it. So I found there to be kind of a sweet spot between about 15 and 30, but your mileage may vary. Just make sure that you're changing both triggers. Finally, in the General tab, this is just the general LED settings. You can change the flashing mode, you can change the LED intensity, and you can also turn on or off the vibration of the controller. I have turned that off. I have no interest in vibration. Now, at the top of the software, you also have an adaptive trigger mode. This lists games that will work for that feedback trigger where the game interacts with those Hall effect motors in the controller. Like I said, I'm not really interested in this. It is a cool setting if you're interested in it. They don't have a ton of games supported, but it seems like they're always adding games to this list. You'll also notice that some of the menus are translated to English and some of them aren't. I haven't really found anything that I'm missing yet, but just something to note. It is kind of a mixed language program, and you may find some deep features that don't work. Like I said, I haven't found anything yet. The next thing is something you might have seen in some of the footage that I've shown or me holding the controller up. This controller also has a small screen on it. It comes with a bunch of GIFs that you can load, or like me, you can load a cool anime GIF. I've chosen to load a GIF of the Colossal Titan here with Aaron. And, you know, I don't really care about these cosmetic things, but this is actually pretty cool. It's just, I've put the Nintendo logo on there rotating. It's a pretty cool, kitschy thing. It is buggy. It takes forever to upload a GIF, and they can't be too long or too large. But if you find a cool loop, it does look pretty cool. The next menu item at the top of the software is called the test panel. It shows you the connection method, and this is a good time to note, this controller can also be connected wirelessly. Now, I'm not interested in wireless because, in my opinion, it decreases reliability. And for this, I'm just going to sit here and hold it, so I'm going to use it wired. But you can use it wired. This panel is just here. It gives you a polling rate readout. Don't pay any attention to this. I have a whole slew of polling rate tests coming up where we're going to compare this to those controllers I showed you earlier. But this is just a nice place to make sure everything's working. You can press all the buttons and see that the functions are indeed mapped to what you want them to be. The final menu is an onboard configuration because you can use this controller with a Switch. I have no use for this, so I'm just going to skip over this entirely. Now that we talked about mostly good and some weird on this controller, let's talk about raw performance. And if you were paying attention when I showed the test panel there in the software, you might have seen that this controller polls very fast. Before we get into all those tests, I just wanted to take a second and talk about polling rate, especially polling rate with the PS5 controller. I got into this discussion on Twitter with a bunch of people. If you have a PS5 controller, let's say you don't buy this controller from this video, don't overclock it to 8K. It's not faster in 8K. It's totally placebo. I'm going to link Marius's tweet and a tweet of mine in the description below where we talk about it a little bit. But all that overclocking this to 8K does is produce 7 of the exact same positional informations. So your computer is just going to work 8 times harder getting information from something just to get duplicates. So just overclock this to 1K and you will be good to go. In addition to doing a bunch of synthetic tests or polling rate tests where I send a bunch of packets from a software to each of these controllers, I also set up a real world latency test. Shout out True Game Data. Tony has been a friend for a very long time. That guy is one of the smartest people I know, and he suggested I do this. So I mounted each controller in front of my phone, mounted to the desk, and I filmed my screen at 240 frames a second on my phone, at over 240 frames per second in game. I flicked each of the controller's right sticks about 20 times while recording. I clipped those into my editing software and I counted frames. What I'm going to show on the screen now are the results from a PS4 controller, a PS5 controller, a Envision controller, and the Apex 4. And as you can see, there's not a whole bunch of difference. A difference of 0.2 or 0.3 from each controller is statistical variance. The point of the controller flick test was to show that there's a lot more stuff going on with system latency than just controller latency. Ultimately, the render queue, the server latency, the input delay from your PC to the monitor, all of those things are going to contribute way more to the ultimate overall latency than just the polling rate of your controller. Now, that's not to discredit a fast, consistent controller. That's the whole reason I'm making this video. A fast, consistent controller will always feel better in game. Your tracking will be smoother. You'll get less missed inputs. If you're one of those players that YYs a lot, the faster the polling rate of the controller and the more consistent the polling rate, the less likely that controller is to miss an input. I just wanted to show these results of the on-screen flick to kind of put everything in perspective. I tested the controllers in 2 softwares, but only one software could do both. GamePadla is able to test both PlayStation and Xbox controllers, so I tested all the controllers in here. I've linked the GamePadla website down below where they actually test, collect data, and rank controllers, and the Apex 4 is actually #1 on their website. So the first thing I did was I did all of the polling rate tests. It collects a bunch of data, so I'm going to show those separately here on the screen now. What you're seeing here is 4,000 samples or 4,000 individual packets of information being sent to the controller while I rotated the left stick. What this does is queries the controller, and it shows you the minimum latency, the maximum latency, average latency, the jitter, and then the polling rate. We're gonna get into all those numbers in a second. I know that's a lot, but first let's look at the polling rate that everybody is familiar with. As you can see on the screen here for the polling rate test, higher is better, and the Apex 4 won. It is at 992 hertz, followed by the PS5 20 points behind at 977, the PS4 at 959, and then we all know that the Envision is polling rate locked at 500 hertz, so it averaged 473. Now, I know I'm gonna get comments that say, no, you can actually go in and overclock this to 1,000. Well, just like I said with this, if you overclock this to 1,000, you're gonna get 2 duplicate readings of the same thing, so it doesn't make any faster. This is locked at 500. If you don't believe me, I've linked this gentleman's test. He did a great test on the Envision, showing it wireless, wired, overclocked, not overclocked, and it does nothing. The next test from GamePadla is the average latency. Here, lower is better. This is on average how many milliseconds it took the controller to respond for those 4,000 test samples. Again, the Apex is in the lead at 1.01. It is very, very close. Almost not even worth mentioning. The PS5 at 1.02. The PS4 at 1.07. I have an asterisk next to that because in my testing data, it was all over the place. It was a very inconsistent controller, no matter how many times I tested it. Then we have the Envision, which we talked about at a 500 hertz locked at the board. It is at 2.11 milliseconds. Now, originally, this was going to be an Envision video. I really love the ergonomics of this controller. I still do, but I've had so many issues with iCUE. It is just not usable for me. It dies in the middle of a game, and I wish there could be some software updates. That being said, after playing on this Apex, it is so much faster feeling than this. I don't know that I could go back to a 500 hertz controller. Average latency seemed like an appropriate time to talk about it, but this does really just kind of feel sluggish now compared to the Apex 4. This next graph here is average max latency, and the best way to think about this is each controller's worst score on average during the polling rate test. And as you can see, the Apex 4 is in the lead because lower is better. It scored 1.53 milliseconds on average, and it has a star next to it because it scored 1.53 maximum for every test that I did. That is very impressive, and another notch for this controller being one of the most consistent that I've ever tested. Next on the chart, we have the Envision, and unfortunately, this just continues to not impress me. I really love the ergonomics of this controller, and I really love a lot of the features, the G keys, remapping keybinds. What I don't love is how unstable that software is, and I think that has something to do with the outliers that you see here. 6.55 milliseconds max latency on average is crazy, and some of these numbers during the test were higher than that, like in the 8s range, and that is just too high for me on a controller. That's worse than some of the Xbox controllers that you can't overclock, and that level of inconsistency I just don't consider very competitive. Next is the PS5 in second place. No surprise here, it is more modern electronics than the PS4, overclocked to 1K polling rate for all of these tests. It was a pretty fast controller. After the PS5, again, not a surprise, is the PS4 controller. It's a little bit older, and like other tests, this was a lot more inconsistent than the PS5 or the perfect score of the Apex. Now, the final stat from GamePadla that I want to share with y'all is jitter. Now, jitter is the consistency of the controller's bus to the PC. So whether that's Bluetooth or wireless, or in my case, for all of these controllers, USB-C to USB-A. How consistent is that feed of information back and forth? The lower the jitter number, the better. And as you can see, the Apex 4 won again. Now, I do want to say that the PS5 and the PS4 controllers are right there with it. There's not that much variance, but again, if I was to show you guys all of the detailed numbers on the Apex 4, it is far more consistent. The PS5 is just as consistent, but you can really start to see some of the dated hardware on this PS4 controller, and I don't have a lot of time on this particular controller. This is actually pretty fresh, so it really does show its dated hardware. Of course, y'all see the giant bar on the screen for the Envision. I really think there's some kind of communication issues between the virtual controller that iQue makes and the actual controller, because the consistency and connection is really, really bad. 1 millisecond of jitter is kind of crazy, even for a 500 hertz controller. And we're going to see that more in the next piece of software, XInput. So now that I've showed you guys this, let's go ahead and move on to XInput. Like I mentioned earlier, XInput Tester only supports Xbox controllers, so the PS5 and PS4 controllers cannot be included in this testing. But what you see on the screen here are some polling rate tests from XInput for the Apex 4 and the Envision. Now, these numbers are going to look different than the average polling rate that you saw from GamePadla, because XInput Tester is a little bit older and measures things differently. I don't think either is more accurate than the other. I would take each with a grain of salt. But as you can see here, it's kind of unfair. The Envision controller is a 500 hertz locked polling rate controller, while out of the box, no overclock, the Apex 4 clocked in on average over 1,000 hertz, 1,041. So that means that this is the only controller available right now that I'm aware of that can actually be overclocked faster than 1,000 hertz, not the placebo 8,000 of a PS5 controller. I'm editing this right now and I misspoke. You cannot overclock the Apex 4. It is board locked to 1,000 hertz and it just happens to pull faster than 1,000 hertz sometimes. Please, 1,000 plus hertz out of the box, no extra settings, no extra steps, GG's. So this controller has no drift, very consistent sticks, and is the fastest polling rate I have ever tested. And if you don't believe me, you can check out GamePadla, linked in the description below. A ton of people have tested this, and it is their #1 rated controller for a reason. Now, that's not to say that this is terrible. 500 hertz is absolutely playable. I think what we'll see here in the data in a little bit, the Envision has a bigger issue with consistency that the Apex does not struggle with in the least bit. So the Envision clocks in at 486, just under 500 hertz, which is not surprising. Most of these controllers never reach their full rated polling rate, except for this, which beat it. Average polling rate directly influences the average latency. So for the tests that I ran, the average latency, again, the winner is the Apex 4 at 0.96. And I put a star next to it because each of the tests averaged 0.96. All of the tests were consistent. Now, the Envision was 2.05, which is to be expected. That is the rated input delay for a 500 hertz controller. For this test, it was a lot more consistent. The numbers were closer to like 1.9, 2.05, and it averaged to 2.05. Moving right along to maximum latency, again, this is the average worst score for the controller. And I don't know if something was going on with XInput here. I did a bunch of tests on the Envision trying to get it to score a little bit better, but the max latency was all over the place. There were some jitters and pings that were at 12 milliseconds, and I don't know if that has to do with iQue, maybe that has to do with some of the crashing, but its average max latency was 9 milliseconds, and I really, really hope someone out there retests this and tells me my data is wrong, but that is just all over the place. Again, the Apex 4 here just putting this controller to shame. 1.8 milliseconds. Really impressive max latency if its average latency is 0.96. I am just blown away by this controller. The last piece of data from XInput Tester is the average jitter. Now again, lower is better. Jitter is the inconsistency in the signal from the controller to the PC, and as you can see here, the Apex is just insane again at 0.01 milliseconds on average. Now the Envision is always going to lose here at 500 hertz, but it's just kind of insane to see this huge of a difference. One data set I was not able to work into a graph in time for this video, but I'll just describe to you is the outliers that you can see in XInput Checker. I'll show the tests here on the screen. When it completes, it shows you how many different latency pings were considered out of the normal range. And as you can see here with the Envision, there were some tests that were scoring 60 or 9 or 45. That's very high. Not a single test that I did with the Apex 4 from FlyDigi had a single outlier, and that is entirely due to its super fast processing and the Hall effect sticks. Now that we talked about the features, the software, I just wanted to take a second and talk about the controller itself. I've played with this controller for about a week now, and I don't know if I've voiced it enough, but this is the most premium feeling controller. The sticks have this really unique spring back that's kind of bouncy, and you can actually see it in game when you let go of your aim. And it is just buttery smooth. There's no friction. The adjustable tension is great. I can dial in exactly the tension I like. I got used to these digital triggers super easy. Like, I'm tapping them right now, and then I have to mash through it to get through it. And I just can't sing the praises of this controller high enough. In my opinion, this is the bar that all controller manufacturers should have to reach for the price. So let's talk about the price. There are two ways to get this controller. You can purchase the controller on Amazon through an affiliate link, which will support the channel. That will be linked in the description below. And it is $160 with 2-day shipping. That is crazy. That is a crazy value for it. 4 back buttons, Hall effect sticks, removable D-pad, removable faceplate, tension tool in it, USB-C, wireless, over 1,000 hertz polling rate. I mean, can you guys tell that I'm excited about this controller? Now, there is another way to get this controller even cheaper yet, if you're brave. If you search FlyDigi Apex 4 on AliExpress, I'm not going to link it here because the links always change. You will be able to find this controller for as low as $70 US. Now, I have ordered one for that price. It is on its way to me, but who knows when it's gonna get here. My experience ordering random parts on AliExpress has been really hit or miss. Sometimes it can take a couple days, sometimes it can take a couple weeks, sometimes it can take a couple months, although I think that was probably COVID. Personally, I ordered mine on Amazon because I'm impatient as all get out, and it has been nothing but a great experience since. I just wanted to say, while the Amazon links support the channel, they did not send me this to test. Neither FlyDigi nor Amazon. I bought this on my own accord, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I also originally tried the Vader 3, which I think is the little brother to this. It is a 500 hertz locked controller, kind of like the Envision. I did not like it as much. There's something off about the sticks. It felt like there was delay. So go ahead and skip that. If you are braving AliExpress to get it for dirt cheap, make sure you are picking the Apex 4. Don't fall for the cheaper colorway that is the Vader 3. If you want the cheapest way, there is no cheaper way than free. I will be giving away a copy of this controller on my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/art_is_war in the coming weeks. So make sure you follow there, hit ! giveaway in the chat for more info and the date of that giveaway. I'm very excited. I hope you guys like this review. It's something different for the channel. I know it's not audio, but I was just so excited when I finally found a Hall effect controller that actually felt premium. I've really been missing this kind of premium feel for mouse and key, and this is the first controller to do it, and I am just so stoked to share it with all y'all. I hope you like it. If you do, let me know down in the description. If you like this video and you want to see more hardware stuff like this, let me know in the comments down below. Like I said, we're going to do that giveaway over on Twitch, and I'm live a lot over there testing all kinds of fun stuff, including a new set of headphones that I'm probably going to review here on the channel. So that is twitch.tv/art_is_war. Make sure you like the video, click the bell so you know when I upload the next one, and until the next one, I'll see you guys later. Peace.